My name is Clara Thorne. At 31, my life is a quiet composition of soil, sunlight, and the rustling of leaves. I'm a landscape architect in Port Blossom, a city that rests in a gentle curve of the coast, where the scent of salt and pine mingle in the air. My home, my sanctuary, is a small timber-framed cottage on Willow Creek Lane, a place I didn't just buy, but willed into being. I spent 3 years reclaiming it from neglect, my own hands sanding the weathered cedar, laying the slate for the garden path, and coaxing life from the tired earth in the backyard. Every climbing rose, every fragrant herb bush, is a testament to a peace I built for myself, piece by deliberate piece. This quiet life stands in stark contrast to the one I was born into. The Thorne family name carries weight in Port Blossom, synonymous with my father's commercial real estate firm, a world of polished steel, sharp angles, and transactions that felt a universe away from my own. I am the responsible daughter, the quiet one. My brother, Julian, 2 years my junior, is the sun around which our family orbits. He is charming, effervescent, and perpetually on the cusp of a breakthrough that never quite arrives. He glides through life on a current of my parents' funding and faith, a golden child whose failures are always reframed as learning experiences. And so it was, on a crystalline Saturday in late September, that our two worlds collided with the force of a tectonic shift. The setting was the Silverbell Conservatory, a breathtaking cathedral of glass and white-wrought iron where Julian was marrying his girlfriend, Sophie. The air inside was warm and humid, thick with the perfume of orchids and damp earth. Sunlight, filtered through the enormous glass panes, cast dappled patterns on the marble floor, illuminating the guests in their silks and starched colors. It was a place of fragile, cultivated beauty, a place I loved, which made the ugliness of what was to come all the more jarring. The sound of the slap was sharp and absolute, a crack that fractured the bubble of polite chatter and clinking champagne flutes. It wasn't a thunderous blow, but it was loud enough. The string quartet faltered, a violin scraping into an uncertain silence. 200 pairs of eyes, once admiring the 5-tiered cake, now swiveled to me. To my father's hand, now falling away from my face. To my mother, whose gasp was not for my stinging cheek, but for the spectacle. "You ungrateful, selfish girl," my father hissed, his voice a low tremor of fury. His face, usually a mask of boardroom composure, was flushed a mottled, dangerous red. "After everything we have given you." I brought a hand to my cheek, my fingers trembling slightly. I could taste the metallic tang of blood where my lip had split against my tooth. A single, perfect tear I hadn't willed into existence escaped and traced a path through my carefully applied foundation. But the pain was distant, a muffled echo. My mind was consumed by the sheer, unvarnished reality of the moment. It had started just minutes before, a seemingly casual conversation by the dessert table. My mother, Margaret, had cornered me, her smile as sweet and cloying as the buttercream frosting on the nearby cupcakes. "Clara, darling," she began, adjusting a stray piece of my hair. "Your father and I were just talking with Julian and Sophie. They're so excited to start their life together, to build a nest." I nodded, bracing myself. I knew this tone. It was the preamble to a request I was not meant to refuse. "Your little cottage," she continued, her voice dropping into a conspiratorial whisper. "It's just so perfect. The garden, the charm, it's the ideal place for them to start a family. And you, darling, you're just one person in that whole house. It's time to be practical." The little cottage. The words were a dismissal of the years of sweat, the splinters under my nails, the mornings I'd woken up with my back aching from laying stone. It wasn't a property to them, it was a resource to be allocated. "No, Mom," I said, my voice quieter than I intended, but firm. "The cottage isn't available." "Don't be difficult, Clara," she sighed, her smile tightening. "Julian needs this. His new venture, well, it requires him to project a certain image. A stable, respectable home life. Julian's latest venture was an app for curating bespoke travel experiences for influencers, funded, like all the others, by my father. It had been 6 months and had yet to produce a single line of code, let alone a client. My cottage, my authentic, handcrafted life, was to be a stage prop for his fabricated one. He and Sophie can find another place, I said, my patience fraying. There are hundreds of lovely homes for rent in Port Blossom. That's when my father, Robert, materialized beside us, a glass of champagne in one hand, his face radiating a potent mix of alcohol and patriarchal authority. "This is not a negotiation, Clara," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Your brother is the man of the family. He has responsibilities. He needs the stability your house provides." The man of the family. The phrase hung in the air, heavy and archaic. Julian, who still brought his laundry home on weekends. Julian, whose car insurance and credit card bills were paid from an account labeled Thorn Holdings. "My answer is still no," I repeated, looking from my mother's anxious face to my father's thunderous one. I kept my voice low, desperate to avoid a scene. "And I'd appreciate it if we didn't discuss this further. It's their wedding day." "Your lack of respect is appalling," my father said, his jaw tight. "My home is not a measure of my respect," I countered, a tremor of real anger finally breaking through my composure. "I earned it. I built it. It's mine. If you bring this up again, I will leave." And that is when he slapped me. Now, in the ringing silence that followed, I saw them all with a devastating new clarity. My mother's hand fluttering to her pearls, her expression one of mortified embarrassment for the social faux pas. My father, standing over me, righteous and indignant, as if I were the one who had committed the offense. And across the room, at the head table, I saw Julian. He wasn't looking at me with concern or shock. He was smirking, a small, self-satisfied little quirk of his lips. Beside him, Sophie looked down at her lap, a picture of smug victory. My public humiliation was the price of their new home. A strange calm washed over me. The hurt receded, replaced by something cold and hard and clear. I straightened my back, lifted my chin, and met my father's furious gaze. A small, humorless smile touched my own lips. "You will all come to regret this," I said. My voice didn't waver. It carried through the silent hall with the resonance of a vow. Then I turned and walked away. The sound of my low heels on the marble floor was the only noise in the room. I felt 200 pairs of eyes on my back, but I didn't falter. I could hear my mother's frantic, stage-whispered, "Clara, come back. You're making a scene." But I kept walking, through the grand archway, past the astonished-looking staff, and out into the cool, evening air. I didn't cry until I was safely inside my car, the engine humming quietly. But the tears that came were not tears of pain or self-pity. They were hot, angry tears of rage. A rage that had been simmering for years, under a placid surface of compliance and duty. I had been the sensible one, the reliable anchor to Julian's drifting kite. I had asked for nothing, taken nothing, built my own world with my own 2 hands. And my reward was this: to be struck and shamed for refusing to hand over the very symbol of my independence to the brother who had never known a day of it. My phone, lying on the passenger seat, began to buzz and light up, a relentless assault. "Mom, you need to come back inside and apologize to your father. People are talking." "Julian, wow, way to be dramatic. We can talk about the house later. Don't ruin my wedding." "Sophie, your family has given you so much. The least you can do is help your brother." "Dad, you will be at the cottage tomorrow morning with the keys. This discussion is over." I stared at the screen, at the utter lack of empathy, the complete inversion of reality where I was the villain. With a deliberate movement, I powered the phone off. The sudden silence was a relief. I started the car and pulled out of the parking lot, but I didn't drive toward Willow Creek Lane. I couldn't bear the thought of my sanctuary feeling tainted by their demands. Instead, I drove toward the Old Town District, to the one place that had always felt like a true refuge: the Bookmark Cafe. It was a cozy nook tucked between an antique shop and a florist, a place that smelled of old paper, roasted coffee, and cinnamon. The owner, a woman in her late 60s with kind eyes and silver hair pinned in a messy bun, was Mrs. Peterson. She had known me since I was a teenager hiding from the world in a fantasy novel. She was wiping down the counter when I entered. She took one look at my face, at the faint red mark blooming on my cheek and my tear-streaked makeup, and her expression softened with concern. She said nothing, simply gestured to my usual table in the back corner, the one with the worn velvet armchair. A few moments later, she appeared with a steaming mug of chamomile tea and a slice of her famous lemon drizzle cake. "A rough day at the wedding?" she asked gently, her voice a balm on my raw nerves. The question broke the dam. "My father slapped me," I said, the words coming out in a choked whisper. "In front of everyone. Because I won't give my cottage to my brother." Mrs. Peterson's eyes, usually so gentle, hardened with a protective fire. "Your cottage? The one you poured your heart and soul into for 3 years." I nodded, taking a shaky sip of the tea. The warmth spread through my chest, loosening the knot of ice that had formed there. "Apparently, Julian needs it more. He's the man of the family." I said the words with a bitter irony that tasted like blood. "That's not family, Clara," she said, her voice soft but firm. "That's tyranny. Don't you let them bully you." She slid the plate of cake closer. "Eat. You need your strength." As I sat there, cradling the warm mug, the city lights beginning to glow outside the window, something shifted inside me. It wasn't a plan for revenge, not in the way one thinks of scorched earth tactics and dramatic confrontations. It was quieter, deeper. A decision to protect what was mine. Not just the cottage, but my life, my peace, my self-respect. They thought they could fell me with one swing, one public act of humiliation. They thought I was a sapling, easily bent to their will. They had forgotten that I had spent years learning how to cultivate deep roots. I pulled my worn leather-bound journal from my bag. It was filled with garden designs, planting schedules, and sketches. But on the clean page at the back, I began to write. Not a plan of attack, but a declaration of independence. I would not be their doormat. I would not be their emergency fund. I would not be their prop. My family thought this was over. They thought their decree was final. They had no idea that for me, this was a beginning. The quiet, accommodating daughter they had always known had walked out of that conservatory and vanished into the night. In her place was a woman who was finally ready to claim her own ground. The following morning, the sun rose on a world that felt fundamentally altered. The air in my cottage seemed charged with a new energy, a sense of purpose. I spent the early hours in my garden, my hands in the cool soil, finding my center among the dew-kissed leaves of lavender and thyme. The earth beneath my fingernails was a reminder of what was real, what I had built. I didn't have to wait long. At precisely 10 o'clock, a luxury sedan, the kind my father favored, pulled up to the curb. I watched from the kitchen window as he and my mother emerged, their movements stiff with indignation. I met them on the front porch, a mug of coffee in my hand, dressed not in a power suit, but in my comfortable gardening clothes, my boots still flecked with mud. I was on my own territory. "We are here for the keys, Clara," my father announced, foregoing any greeting. "Good morning to you, too," I said calmly, taking a slow sip of coffee. "There are no keys for you." My mother stepped forward, her face a carefully constructed mask of pained disappointment. "Clara, please. Don't do this. Don't tear this family apart over a house." "A house?" I let out a soft, incredulous laugh. "This isn't about a house, Mom. It's about respect. It's about the fact that you both stood there and watched my father strike me, and your only concern was that it was embarrassing." I looked directly at my father. "You put your hands on me. In public. For a piece of property you have no claim to. The discussion isn't over. It has irrevocably changed. I am your father," he boomed, taking a step up onto the porch. "You will show me respect. Respect is earned, Dad. It isn't owed." I said, my voice as quiet and unyielding as the old oak tree in my yard. And you lost any right to mine yesterday. Now, I'd like you to leave my property. We're not leaving until… Actually, you are. I held up my phone, which I had been discreetly recording with since they arrived. And if you take one more step, I will call the police and file a restraining order. I'm sure the Port Blossom Chronicle would be very interested to learn why Robert Thorne, pillar of the community, is being legally barred from approaching his own daughter. That stopped him cold. The mention of public perception, his one true vulnerability, was more effective than any shout. My mother's face went pale. You wouldn't dare. Yesterday, I wouldn't have, I said, my gaze unflinching. Today is a new day. I watched as the reality of my resolve settled in, their shock curdling into resentment. They stood there for a long moment, adrift in this new, unfamiliar dynamic. Finally, without another word, they turned and walked back to their car. As the sedan pulled away, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. This was just the first skirmish, and it had drained me more than a full day of digging and hauling stone. Over the next week, the assault came from all sides, a coordinated campaign of guilt and manipulation. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in years called to tell me I was breaking my mother's heart. My aunt sent a long, sanctimonious email about the importance of family loyalty. Julian's friends posted veiled comments on social media about people who forget where they came from. I read each message, not with pain, but with a growing sense of detachment. It was like watching a play for which I already knew the ending. I didn't reply to any of them. I simply archived the messages and continued with my life. What they failed to understand was that my years of being the responsible one had equipped me with more than just a strong work ethic. It had made me meticulous. While they had been focused on Julian's grand, imaginary futures, I had been paying attention to the concrete details of the present. And I had been the one to set up my father's home office network, the one who had helped my mother organize her digital files, the one they called whenever anything with a screen behaved unexpectedly. My father had always talked about the Thorne Family Trust, a fund set up by my grandfather, as a sacred institution. It was meant to be a legacy for future generations, its principle untouched, its interest used for education and major life events. I had a suspicion, a faint unease that had been growing for years, every time Julian's latest failed business was quietly shuttered and a new one was magically funded. I didn't need to hack into anything. I simply made an appointment with my lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Ms. Davies, who specialized in estate law. I explained the situation, omitting the slap, but focusing on the pressure to give up my home and my suspicions about the family finances. You are a co-beneficiary of the trust, Clara, she confirmed a few days later, after reviewing the documents I was legally entitled to. And your suspicions are, unfortunately, well-founded. For the past 5 years, your father, as the trustee, has been making significant loans from the trust's principal to his own holding company. Loans that have never been repaid. These funds appear to directly correlate with the seed money for your brother's various enterprises. So he's been using my inheritance to fund Julian's failures, I said, the reality of it settling like a cold stone in my stomach. Essentially, yes, Ms. Davies said. It's a gross mismanagement of his fiduciary duties. If this were to become public, or if you were to formally petition for an audit and a change of trustee, it would be catastrophic for your father's professional reputation. Not necessarily criminal, but a profound breach of trust that would raise serious questions among his partners and investors. The knowledge was a heavy weight, but also a shield. This wasn't a weapon for revenge. It was a tool for liberation. It was the key to the cage I hadn't even fully realized I was in. My mother made the next move. She appeared at my design studio one afternoon, her eyes red-rimmed, carrying a peace offering of pastries from a bakery she liked. I came to talk sense into you, she said, her voice trembling slightly as she sat in the client chair opposite my large drafting table. Your father is beside himself. He's sorry. You know how he is, he was just stressed about Julian, about the wedding. I continued sketching a design for a new perennial bed, the charcoal soft against the textured paper. Stressed enough to assault his daughter? It was a tap, Clara. A mistake, she pleaded, twisting her hands in her lap. You have to let it go. We're family. I've been letting things go my whole life, Mom, I said, finally looking up at her. My gaze was steady. I let go of the art classes I wanted to take so Julian could go to that expensive summer camp. I let go of the down payment I was saving so you and Dad could give him a fresh start after he dropped out of college. I have been the family shock absorber for 30 years. I'm done. That's not fair, she whispered. Isn't it? I pushed my sketch aside. Let's talk about what's not fair. Let's talk about the Thorne family trust. The color drained from her face. The carefully constructed sorrow evaporated, replaced by genuine fear. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't you? I asked gently. I do. I know Dad has been draining the principal to prop up Julian. My principal. My future. He's been gambling my inheritance on Julian's whims. I let the words hang in the quiet space of my sunlit studio. She stared at me, her mouth slightly agape. How could you? I started paying attention, I said simply. I want to be left alone, Mom. I want my home, my life, and my future to be my own. No more demands. No more requests. No more showing up unannounced. The cottage is mine. My finances are mine. My life is mine. End of story. And if we don't agree, she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I leaned back in my chair, my heart pounding but my voice serene. Then I will have no choice but to protect my interests. I will petition to have Dad removed as trustee and for a full, public audit of the trust. I don't think his business partners would appreciate learning how he manages his financial responsibilities. She looked at me as if seeing a stranger. The pleading was gone, replaced by a look of bewildered defeat. You would destroy your father's reputation. No, I said softly, a deep sadness welling within me. He destroyed it himself when he decided his son's desires were more important than his duties. When he decided his daughter's face was an acceptable place to vent his frustration. I picked up my charcoal again. I'm just holding up a mirror. She left the pastries on the table. They sat there all afternoon, a sweet, untouched monument to a negotiation that had failed. I knew this wasn't the end, but it was a turning point. I had drawn a line not in the sand, but in solid stone, and I had the tools to defend it. Later that evening, my phone rang. It was Julian. Mom told me what you're doing, he said, his voice a mixture of bravado and panic. You're bluffing. You can't prove anything. I walked over to my window, looking out at the deep twilight settling over my garden. The first fireflies of the evening were beginning to blink among the hydrangeas. I don't have to prove anything, Julian, I said, my voice calm. I just have to ask the question in a formal legal setting. The truth will do the rest. Is that a risk you want Dad to take? There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear his shallow breathing. What do you want, Clara? He finally asked, his voice stripped of its usual charm. I want peace, I said. I want you and Mom and Dad to leave me alone. I want you to build your own life and let me live mine. You've changed, he said, a note of accusation in his voice. No, Julian, I replied, a profound sense of clarity washing over me. I've just stopped pretending. I ended the call and stood by the window for a long time, watching the fireflies dance. The house behind me was silent, safe. The garden was mine. The night was mine. I wasn't a victor in a war. I was just a woman who had finally, painstakingly, reclaimed her own quiet corner of the world. The months that followed were characterized by a profound and unnerving silence. The barrage of calls and messages ceased. The flying monkeys retreated. It was as if a constant, low-grade static that had been humming in the background of my entire life had suddenly been switched off. The quiet was liberating, but also lonely. It was the sound of a foundation cracking, of an old structure groaning under the strain of change. I poured myself into my work, taking on a project that felt both ambitious and deeply personal, designing a therapeutic and healing garden for the new oncology wing at Port Blossom General Hospital. The work was consuming in the best possible way. I spent my days sketching winding pathways, selecting plants for their sensory properties, the soft, fuzzy leaves of lamb's ear for touch, the calming scent of chamomile, the vibrant colors of coneflowers to delight the eye. I was designing a sanctuary for others, and in doing so, I was tending to my own. One crisp afternoon in early spring, nearly 6 months after the wedding, I was on my knees in my own garden, dividing irises, when I heard a car door close. I looked up to see my father standing tentatively on the sidewalk. He looked different. Smaller, somehow. The formidable confidence that had always radiated from him was gone, replaced by a weary uncertainty. He hadn't come to the door. He was just standing there, as if waiting for permission. I wiped my hands on my jeans, stood up, and walked slowly to the edge of my property. "Hello, Dad." "Clara," he said, his voice raspy. He seemed to search for words. "Your garden is looking beautiful." "Thank you," I said, my tone neutral. He shuffled his feet, his expensive shoes looking out of place on the humble sidewalk. "Julian and Sophie moved into a small apartment downtown," he said, not looking at me. "He got a job in marketing for a dental supply company." There was no pride in his voice, only a flat recitation of facts. "We had to restructure some things. I had to sell off one of the smaller commercial properties to balance the books, to pay back the trust." "I see," I said. I felt no triumph, only a deep, aching sadness for all this wreckage. He finally met my eyes, and I was startled by the raw pain I saw there. "I was wrong, Clara," he said, the words sounding foreign and difficult on his tongue. "What I did at the wedding, there is no excuse. My behavior as trustee. I was arrogant. I thought I knew best. I was a fool." He took a ragged breath. "I have lost so much. My reputation. Your mother's peace of mind. You." It was the most honest thing he had ever said to me. The armor was gone, and the man underneath was just as flawed and frightened as anyone else. "You haven't lost everything," I said softly. "You still have your family." "But it's broken," he whispered. "Maybe it was always broken," I replied. "Maybe it just needed to fall apart so it could be rebuilt into something real." He seemed to absorb that, nodding slowly. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a simple cream-colored envelope. "Your mother's 60th birthday is next month. She's not having a party, just a small dinner at the Coral Door. We would be honored if you would come." He held it out to me. I hesitated for only a moment before taking it. The paper was thick and felt warm from his hands. "I'll think about it," I said. He nodded, a flicker of something like hope in his eyes. "That's all I can ask." He left without another word. I stood there, turning the invitation over and over in my hands. Part of me wanted to burn it, to maintain the perfect, clean break I had fought so hard for. But another, quieter part of me knew that true strength wasn't about building impenetrable walls. It was about having the courage to install a gate, and the wisdom to know when, and for whom, to open it. I did go to my mother's birthday dinner. I arrived on my own time and chose a seat at the end of the table. The atmosphere was subdued, fragile. Julian and Sophie were there, looking chastened. He spoke about his new job with a surprising humility. My father drank sparkling water instead of wine and listened more than he spoke. My mother watched me with an anxious, hopeful expression all night. We didn't talk about the slap, or the cottage, or the trust. We talked about the weather, about a movie someone had seen, about the excellent sea base. The conversation was stilted, full of holes where the old dynamics used to be. But the silence in those gaps felt different now. It wasn't the silence of things left unsaid, but the quiet of a space being cleared. Room for something new to grow. I left early, after the cake. As I stood to go, my mother walked me to the door. "Thank you for coming, Clara," she said, her voice thick with emotion. It meant the world to me. "Happy birthday, Mom," I said. And then, I did something I hadn't done in 6 months. I leaned in and gave her a brief, gentle hug. She felt frail in my arms. When I pulled back, she was crying silently. A year to the day after the wedding, I stood on a newly laid pathway in the healing garden at Port Blossom General. The project was complete. Soft grasses swayed in the breeze, a small fountain gurgled peacefully, and the air was sweet with the scent of climbing jasmine. It was more beautiful than I had even imagined. There was a small dedication ceremony. The hospital director gave a speech. A generous donor said a few words, and then, to my surprise, they asked me to speak. I walked to the small lectern, my notes suddenly feeling inadequate. I looked out, not at the assembled crowd, but at the garden. At the sturdy, resilient life I had helped nurture. Gardens teach us about patience, I began, my voice clear and steady. They teach us that sometimes, for new things to grow, old things must be cut back, pruned away. That the ground must be broken and turned over. It can be a violent, painful process, but it's necessary. It's the only way to create a space for light and air and new life. I saw my parents and Julian standing at the back of the crowd. They had come. They hadn't told me they would. They just showed up. My father met my gaze and gave me a small, solemn nod. My mother offered a watery, genuine smile. This garden, I concluded, is a testament to that process. It is a place of peace, born from disruption. A place of healing. My hope is that all who walk here find a measure of the peace it has brought me to create it. As I stepped away from the lectern, I felt a lightness I hadn't known I was missing. The anger was gone, the bitterness had faded. What remained was a quiet strength, a deep-seated knowledge of my own worth. My family and I were not healed, not whole, not yet. We were like a kintsugi bowl, the Japanese art of repairing broken pottery with gold. The cracks were still there, but they were being filled with something more precious, more honest. They hadn't taken my home from me. Instead, by trying, they had forced me to build a much larger one inside myself, a sanctuary of self-respect, with boundaries as clear as a garden path and a newfound capacity for a love that was conditional, not on what I would give, but on the respect I would be given. And that was a landscape more beautiful and enduring than any I could ever design.